Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating, Vice President of Product Strategy for Zimperium, and I would like to welcome you to another one of our webinars. We've been starting a series that has to do with compliance and how mobile devices and various different compliance mandates all kind of dovetail together. We've rolled through PCI and HIPAA and GDPR and NDB. Today's topic, as you can see, so you know you're in the right place, is in NERC compliance. And of course, you know, NERC is the North America Electric Reliability Corporation. So this is a North America-based mandate. There are similar ones in other places as well, but that's the one we're going to dive into. So standard upfront perfunctory conversations. We will make slides available to anybody who would request them. We also will have an archived version of this up on the site. Please, especially when it comes to things like critical infrastructure and the like, feel free to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram. Well, not Instagram, Facebook. Maybe we should do Instagram. It's actually an interesting idea. I didn't even think about that. And that way you can be kept up to date on all the current information. So I got to tell you all that this is actually, oh, and by the way, use the Q&A. We'll try to keep this about 20 minutes. And then we will do Q&A if there is Q&A. If there's not, we don't make it up. We're not that type of company. So feel free to do that. We don't use the chat capability because we've had some issues with it. So even if you have technical questions, please feel free to throw that into the Q&A, and we will take care of that. So this is a topic that is near and dear to me. I've been in cybersecurity for 20 plus years. Obviously all here in the United States. I guess not obviously, but it has been all here in the United States. And I must tell you that that part of what I love about innovating and doing really innovative cybersecurity companies is it really means a lot to me to prevent malware attacks against U.S. infrastructure. Anybody that's trying to come after the United States and our allies is something that I kind of take personally. And obviously protecting the grid is a key component of that whole thing. So with that as a setup comment, let's dive into not only just the NERC part, but in particular how it pertains to mobile. So some quick facts about mobile security and NERC in particular, and then we'll dive into specifics. First one, NERC has included mobile since it took effect in 2008. Simple fact is mobile or endpoints, any mobile device, any device that actually touches the critical infrastructure has been things that have to be covered. And so for as long as there has been the NERC mandates, then mobile has been a component of it. Second, typical enterprise, 60% of the mobile devices are, or 60% of the devices are endpoints are mobile. Now, that doesn't mean 60% of the endpoints touching critical infrastructure are mobile. It's a significantly lower number. But a huge number of devices are, in fact, in the enterprise, and an increasingly large number are touching critical infrastructure, in particular as it pertains to use cases like the service side of things, giving technicians and the guys even dealing with the lines and the various different parts of the grid schematics on tablets, for instance. If a hacker gets that, they've got complete information on every single part of the infrastructure, and that obviously is a very dangerous thing to have get out there. These endpoints are under attack. I'll talk about what the attacks are. I'll talk about the specific requirements that NERC has that cover endpoints like mobile. There are different compliance mandates. Some are very prescriptive, and some are more general. General examples are NDB in Australia around the breach database, breach disclosures, GDPR. Those are ones that say you must take security precautions, but they don't prescribe anything. NERC, PCI, HIPAA, CFATs in the chemical facility side, these guys actually explicitly have requirements that say you must do this. We're going to talk about those as they pertain to mobile. Another point here, I mentioned about the Q&A and said we're not the type of company to make up Q&A just to hear ourselves talk or give ourselves softball questions. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to be real clear with you. You will not be magically NERC compliant by buying our stuff. There is a raft of things in the NERC requirements that we don't have anything to do with. For instance, There are NERC SIP requirements for making sure that vegetation is cut back far enough from the power lines that in a freeze, they don't take out the grid. We don't have chainsaws. We're not going to do anything to help you with that. We will be very explicit about the ones we do help you address, which are endpoint requirements around mobile. So that'll be a kind of a philosophy as we go through this. And then even though these webinars are not intended to be full on product pitches, it always makes sense that we basically say, hey, look, here's the reality of the situation. Here's the problem. Here's why you should at least consider us. And we have multiple utility customers that are using us specifically to address their mobile NERC compliance requirements. So we actually have a leg to stand on in this regard. So with that, we always need to do this. We always have to set it up because mobile is the new endpoint. The simple fact is 100% of our customers detect threats. We now have thousands of customers worldwide. We have tens of millions of endpoints worldwide. 100% of our customers detect threats. So a lot of people are like, well, I don't know, are there really mobile threats? Well, that's because there's no visibility on them. The fact is, as I mentioned earlier, in a typical enterprise, 60% of endpoints are mobile. An endpoint is an endpoint, is an endpoint. If I've got schematics for, let's say, a substation sitting on a laptop, that's no different than if I have schematics sitting on a tablet. If I need to protect it in one place, I need to protect it in the other. And the reality is we have spent all of the endpoint security, which I came from, like I said, this is a passion of mine, protecting the grid, right? 40% of the typical endpoints are now protected by traditional endpoint security solutions. That leaves 60% wide open with no visibility, no security, no protection. Now, as I mentioned, I don't personally have the numbers of the devices accessing the grid, but it's not 40-60, I guarantee that. It's probably more like 80%, 20, with 80% being HMIs and things on those lines with the SCADA systems. But still, there's zero visibility on mobile. And there's a whole bunch of new things that go after mobile that make them a lot easier to attack. And there are time-tested security adages, right? One of which is land and expand. The bad guys are always going to find the weakest link in and then expand from there. Since there's no security, no visibility, no protection on mobile devices today, that is a wide open territory. Matter of fact, Lazarus Group is the North Korean hacking army, which of course has already been detected inside the grid at various different places. Lazarus Group is doing Android malware, right? So these guys, they're already well attuned to what's going on here and trying to figure out how to go after these things. So I mentioned mobile malware just a second ago there with Lazarus Group. It's important to kind of run through and look at the different attack types. There's 4 broad categories. Second time-tested security adage has been around for as long as cybersecurity is persistence. The bad guys they have a business model and they have an ROI that they're trying to get. In order to maximize the return on their investment, whatever device they take over, whether it's a server or whether it's an HMI or whether it's a mobile device, they want to be persistent for as long as humanly possible. They want to own that turf so that they can expand from that turf as long as humanly possible. Because mobile is architected differently than traditional endpoints, all apps are in containers. So in the world we all came from, on the traditional side, an app could come in and go sideways through other apps. Can't do that in mobile. The only way to be persistent in mobile is to actually compromise the device, actually elevate privileges. So of the 4 major attack vectors, network attacks, phishing sites, and malicious apps, which I'm going to talk to now, are really conduits. They're really the means. The end is a device attack, okay? Because that's the only way you can be persistent, because everything else is in buckets, as we talked about. Everything else is in containers, right? So coming back now, going right to left, malicious apps. The vast majority of all malware in mobile is nothing but fraud. Now, that's a big issue if you're a bank, but last time I checked, banks are not dealing with the NERC SIPs. So it is untargeted, it is after consumers, it is designed for fraud. Now, can malware, as I mentioned, let's say in the Lazarus Group example, can malware deliver an exploit to compromise the device? Absolutely. But it's not an efficient model. And as I mentioned, these guys are bad dudes, but they're very good at what they do. They're going to find the most efficient way to get to being persistent on this device so that I can use that device to expand into the rest of the critical infrastructure. That's not malware. Phishing gets a little bit further up that way. Mobile phishing is a real issue. According to Verizon, 90% of the breaches start with a phishing attack. Well, now 2/3 of emails are read on mobile. And there's a whole raft of reasons, and we've done full webinars on phishing, and we're going to be doing a lot more going forward, that make phishing on mobile so much easier. Smaller form factors, easier to trick people. They're reading their personal emails on devices that then can be compromised on the corporate side. There's a whole series of things. But again, it's untargeted. Not the best way. Zimperium has been built for the very beginning to protect enterprises, utilities, government entities against targeted attacks. If I'm a bad guy, and if I'm going after XYZ utility, I'm not going to drop an app in the App Store and pray somebody from the utility downloads it. That's a stupid business model. And as I've already said, these guys are not stupid. They're bad. They're not stupid. They're really good. They're really smart, actually. What they're going to do is they're going to set up a fake Wi-Fi network directly across in a coffee shop or directly across from XYZ Utilities headquarters. They're going to wait till somebody comes in, connects to that network with their smartphone, air quotes, because the phone introduces itself to the network, not the other way around. And then it will compromise the device immediately. So we knew this from the very beginning. And the simple fact is the data bears out 90% of targeted attacks against an enterprise, which is all we care about, right, start with a network attack. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but this is important to know that in mobile, these attacks are different, and the vast majority of these all start with a targeted attack or start with a network attack. And by the way, some folks might be saying, okay, well, hold up. Let's say that we got a tablet. This is a good question, by the way. And I'm not saying it because I'm coming up with it. I'm saying if I was in your shoes, this is what I'd be thinking, right? If I got a tablet and it's got all my schematics, what happens if it never leaves the utilities networks, right? It's all still connecting to the corporate Wi-Fi network. It's not going to the coffee shop, right? You know. Now, first of all, that's probably not super practical because a lot of these guys that have these tablets that have the schematics are the guys that are outside cruising into some remote places to be able to fix power lines, right? But for those folks that are still within the corporate network, the fact is all it takes is broadcasting a network at a higher frequency, a higher power than the one that's existing, and the phone will connect to it first. So it's even if you're inside corporate networks, you still can be attacked by a network attack. But under scenario, you still need to compromise the device. So what are the goals? I mean, obviously, credentials, data. Really, when it comes to the NERC SIPs, it's weaponization. You know, I mentioned that, you know, some of the compliance requirements are prescriptive and some are more general. Of the prescriptive, there are really two types in my mind. There's compliance mandates that are set to protect the data, and there's compliance mandates that are set to protect systems. If you're a hamburger joint, you care more about PCI, cardholder data. If you're a hospital, you care about patient data. If you're the grid, you care about the assets. You care about the systems that are running the grid more than data. Same thing with CFATs in the chemical facilities, right? So what are the requirements? These devices are out there. There's a whole bunch of them. There's no visibility on them, and they're open to attacks, vast majority of which starting with the network attack and then compromising the device. What are the actual requirements for mobile? Well, as we mentioned, an endpoint is an endpoint is an endpoint. So there are 3 subsections, all of SIP 07, and these things have moved over time because I remember when I first started doing this back in 2008, and it was all application whitelisting, you know, critical, and they were in different spots. Now they're kind of consolidate a little bit. So SIP 07-6, subsection 2, R2, is all about patch management. Now, one of the things that's interesting is, and this will also factor directly into the compensating control. You know how sometimes you can actually meet the letter directly. Other times you need to have a compensating control to say, look, I know the I know the requirement guys wrote this requirement this way, but it can't happen. So like, for instance, patch management has been an issue in the NERC side of things forever because somebody wrote it like traditional endpoints and said, okay, as soon as a patch is available, you must implement it as quickly as possible and then reboot. People are like, wait a minute, this is a nuclear power plant. We don't get to reboot this every single time we want to, right? You have to do it in maintenance windows. But then you'd have to explain, okay, but we've got visibility, we've got a compensating control. In mobile, there is no such thing as a patch management system. It requires a user to update that device. So how we help with this whole thing is, this is a requirement. You have to do it. You have to be able to patch any of these things that are accessing any of the cyber assets. You need a requirement like ours. You need a company like ours that will tell you, here's the current OS level of every one of these guys' devices. Here's ones that are not upgradable. So when Google puts out a patch, they have to give it to each of the manufacturers. Each of the manufacturers has to go to each of the telcos before it actually rolls out. So sometimes you can have devices that are out of date, but they're not upgradable because a patch has not been made available for that specific device. We will let you know that, right? But basically having this information of what devices are out there and are they on the right level, are they patched? And then for those that are not patched, being able to proactively quickly go after them and potentially say, you know what, we're going to create a policy that says, if you're 2 versions behind, we don't care. You don't get access to anything. And we're going to wipe our enterprise data off that device until you do. So you can do some things to force it, but you have to be able to explain it to the auditors in terms of what it is that you're doing. So patch management on mobile, you must be able to do just like any others. Second one, pretty obvious. Now, there's the prescriptive part. You see here, these requirements were written from the traditional endpoint side of the world, right? You can tell that I'm kind of passionate about this, right? It specifically says you must deal with malicious code. We think, yes, you need to deal with malicious code, but as I even said earlier, the intention behind this, the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law is you have to protect your devices against being exploited and utilized. So in our world, we actually, I know, and the customers of ours that are meeting with their NERC auditors are saying, you know what, yeah, okay, we're doing this. We've got malware detection, mobile malware detection with Zimperium. But by the way, we also solve the real problem, which is device exploit detection, network detection, and phishing detection. So we're covering the entire gamut. We're going above and beyond the prescription because this was written when apps could go sideways through other apps. So you could be persistent on an HMI just by using apps back then. Can't do that in mobile. So you gotta, it's like, and for us, I mentioned, again, that this is a passion of mine, protecting the grid. All these little malpert attackers that are running around causing problems for everybody, right? You can check the box or you can secure the box. We think you should be doing both, right? Checking the box, these are minimum requirements. You can say, okay, I'm going to put something in, check. Okay, I put malware detection on. You have not protected our infrastructure. You need to protect against the device exploits. And then there's, all the things having to do with security and event monitoring, right? And we create the greatest level of forensics in the mobile security business. So we've got knobs based on groups, very granular, based on the groups of the tablets or the devices and groups of the people that can go all the way from very little forensic information because we are all the way off the charts on the privacy protection scale, for instance, GDPR, or the city of New York has an app that Mayor de Blasio is given for free to all the residents of New York City called NYC Secure. That is our product. 0 data leaves that device, 0. But for devices that have to do with NERC compliance, critical infrastructure, cyber assets, you would want as much forensics as humanly possible. You'd want to drop it into your SIM solutions, create alerts immediately, and be able to take action before they can expand from that platform. So those are the requirements. I mentioned this is not a product pitch, but just to kind of give you a quick snapshot of why we have so many utility customers coming our way. I'm going to come back to the attack side. I mentioned we were built from the very beginning to protect against targeted attacks. We were not a consumer company that has tried to pivot into the enterprise market. We were built from the very beginning. And so we knew from the very beginning the bad guy was going to own the network 9 times out of 10. And if the bad guy owns the network 9 times out of 10, you have to do all of your detection on device. Otherwise, you can't defend yourself. Gartner is now endorsing this, and this is from last year, last fall. You can see an on-device agent provides better likelihood of the protection persisting over a compromised network. That's about as strong of a statement on a particular approach you're going to get from Gartner. When you actually talk to the Gartner analysts, they will reinforce the fact that in a lot of instances, if your solution is a cloud-based detection, 100% of that detection goes away, depending on attack vector, as soon as the bad guy owns the network. Because what is the bad guy going to do? First thing he's going to do is he's going to cut off access to anything that can detect him. Because again, they're good at what they do, right? So we have one engine, it's called Z9, and it is trained up in the lab, machine learning, to be able to detect not only known but unknown attacks across these 4 vectors. That one engine can be rolled out in 2 primary ways. One, if you're trying to protect the device 100% of the time and all the data that's on the device, basically next generation antivirus, next generation EPP, if you use the Gartner terminology, endpoint protection platform, for mobile, that's ZIPS, stands for Z Intrusion Prevention System. That is the core of 98% of our NERC implementations, because we're protecting that tablet all the time, that smartphone all the time. But for anybody who has a mobile app, we have an SDK that can actually drop Z9 directly inside of a mobile app. Now, in that case, you're not protecting the device 100% of the time. You're protecting the app in the session that app is having. So in the financial industry, for instance, we have one very large customer who's using ZIPS to protect a couple 100,000 of their employees and using ZApp to protect millions of mobile banking users. So that's an example outside of this. But like I said, when it comes to the NERC side, it's really ZIPS, because it's protecting the device 100% of the time. Both of those come in a huge advantage of the fact that we do all of our detection on device instead of having cloud-based detection for everything, is that we're completely cloud agnostic. We couldn't care less what cloud you put it on. Another huge advantage for NERC customers, you can do an on-prem implementation because we're doing all the detection on the device. So we don't need to do anything fancy with the console. If you want to do an on-prem implementation, part of the whole air gap world, whether it's the electric utilities or a bunch of our IC customers and the 3-letter agency guys, they want that on-prem capability. Behind the console is a capability called Z3A. That stands for Advanced App Analysis. Their malicious apps will be detected by Z9. But there's a bunch of perfectly legitimate apps that are on the same tablets and on the same phones. They're not malicious. But because all mobile apps are basically Legos that have been put together with an SDK from here, a library from there, sometimes on purpose and sometimes on accident, they open up huge security and privacy risks. For instance, 25% of iOS apps send traffic off the device unencrypted. A huge percentage of apps send traffic to a foreign country, or they can send traffic to a cloud service that you don't support. So you could be doing all this stuff on the endpoint protection side of things again, but you could actually be opening yourself up to a huge hole based on the apps that are on your employees' devices. So we will actually scan those apps and tell you where those risks are, and then we can create policies. We're not going to allow an app that sends traffic to China, for instance, just making it up. Because we're the enterprise guys also, we connect with the greatest number of EMMs. We also can handle multiple EMMs in a single tenant. So if you're moving from one to the other, or if you acquire, let's say, another utility and you have 2 at the time, you can still protect with the mobile threat solution while the EMMs are being figured out, right? And then, as I mentioned, we got the best forensics in the business, and we can put all that stuff down into whatever solution that you happen to use for your SIM solution. So with that, I promised you that I was going to try and keep it to 20, 25 minutes, and that's exactly where we are. So I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions. And again, remind you to please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. My recommendation is Twitter predominantly, because that's the one that gets I think a lot of additional commentary and coverage from people in the security infrastructure. Okay, I don't see any questions. Well, I just want to thank everybody once again and hope you have a fantastic day.